When you hear about slavery for 400 years, that sounds like a choice. Like, you was there for 400 years and it's all of y'all?
Let me say this very quickly. Of course, his statement was extremely controversial amongst the liberal blacks. Listen to what he stated. He said, slavery for 400 years sounds like a choice. You know what Kanye West is? He's someone who's questioning the slave narrative. And as I've stated on this channel numerous times, the slave narrative is something that's taught to so-called black children to program them from a young age to synchronize the term slave with the term black and all other races as well. Now, these same other races will talk about how all races have been put in slavery, but they know that when they think black, they think slave because that's what they've been taught in the educational system. Kanye West, in a very clunky, awkward way, is trying to question the slave narrative. First off, it's totally fallacious. And it's a whole other topic for another day. But as I've stated in the past, so-called blacks had Caucasians in slavery as well during that time period. So-called blacks had other blacks in slavery. Caucasians had Caucasians in slavery, or what was known more as indentured servitude. You had so-called blacks who were indentured servants as well. But the slavery paradigm that's put forth is totally based on what they call the triangle trade, which is Caucasian European explorers went to the west coast of Africa, got slaves, brought them over here to the Americas in exchange for rum, so on and so forth. Most of that is not based in fact. As I've stated, the so-called black people of the Americas come from 3 separate locations. You have the Aboriginal blacks who are already here. You have the so-called blacks that were brought here from the west coast of Africa. And you have the so-called black people who came over here from Europe, who were fleeing a lot of the religious wars / race wars of Europe. And that's the history that they don't want so-called black people to know about, is the fact that many of the so-called black people who came over here to the Americas and many of the so-called black people today are descendants of black Europeans who ruled in Europe for well over 1,000 years and started to fall during the 1600s. But those are some other topics for another day. But you know what's so interesting about what Kanye West said as well? He said that slavery sounded like a choice. And so many liberal blacks got upset with what he said. But when Harriet Tubman, who supposedly is one of the top heroic figures in the black community, what was the quote that was attributed to her? She said that I could have saved far more slaves if I could have gotten them to understand that they were slaves. So what's the difference between what she said and what Kanye West basically implied with his statement? Nothing. There is no difference. And then when you add in Martin Luther King stating that it was his dream and his hope that he could hold hands with Caucasians and they could all sing that old Negro spiritual. That's another archetypal figure that so-called black people look to as a hero. But I wonder if they will call Martin Luther King a coon because he sought to hold hands with Caucasians. That's what I mean when I say a lot of our people are very confused. And it was just laughable to me to see people like Daz Dillinger and the rapper Eve talk about how Kanye West is confused and how he's ignorant. Rapper Eve basically nothing but a $2 hoe who had the greatest come up in stripper history. Married to a Caucasian man running her mouth about Kanye West. That's how high the buffoon factor is in the liberal black aspect of the so-called black community.
It's like we're mentally in prison. I like the word prison because slavery.
And that's exactly what he meant the whole time. He was not trying to imply that so-called black people loved to be slaves back in the early 1800s. What he was saying is that our people are still under a certain level of quote-unquote slavery today. Why is that? Because our people are caught up in various paradigms and archetypes that they cannot get out of. They cannot think outside of those boxes. And of course, he's the wrong person to bring forth those facts because he does not know how to edify people properly, because he does not understand history. He doesn't know history. But he's someone searching for the truth. He just has never been taught anything.
Slavery goes too direct to the idea of blacks. It's like slavery, Holocaust Jews, slavery is blacks.
Exactly. You see, he's trying to make certain connections because he understands that the slavery narrative is not something that makes sense. And he understands the programming. Slavery equals blacks. And that's what I've been telling a lot of you brothers for a very long time. That's what is taught to the children to the so-called black children that are sent to the so-called educational system here in this society.
So prison is something that unites us as one race, blacks and whites being one race.
Now, there he goes trying to angle for that hug. That's the part where he departs from the truth and what he was trying to get towards. And that's the reason why people cannot build towards anything of substance, because their true goal is to get that hug. He's trying to find a unifying force between so-called black and so-called white when he was on a good road.
That we're one, we're the human race. We're human beings and stuff. And eventually, you know...
Can I go back to something you just said? Because I don't want to let it pass. You said...
Of course you don't want to let it pass, because you're a Caucasian Jew. You see an opportunity to engage in a race discussion and see if you can have a so-called black man step on a landmine.
Said that slavery was around for 400 years. At a point, it becomes a choice.
Yeah, right now we're choosing to be enslaved.
This is the second time that Kanye West has expounded on his sentiment, and he has stated explicitly that it is based on his understanding of mental slavery, not a quote-unquote choice that so-called black people made to be in physical slavery. It's the second time that he's made that very clear.
We're like, okay, so Ebro, I FaceTime him, and I'm there with Candace, right? And Ebro starts bringing up his version of facts, right? And
first off, you're not supposed to be having real discussions with clowns like that. He's a hip-hop DJ, a hip-hop VJ. His job is to appeal to the intelligence level of his audience, and no disrespect, the average person listening to those radio stations is not particularly swift or smart. So he has to make sure that the tone of the conversation stays at a low enough level to appeal to his listeners. That means that the conversation has to be mostly emotionally based. It cannot be factually based or anything meant to appeal to intelligence. But you know, we're going to continue this on part 3. Peace.